The sun gleamed off a row of seven-figure vehicles, Ferraris, Bentleys, and a freshly delivered McLaren parked under a silver awning. Inside the Valencia Auto Gallery, champagne flutes clinked and sales associates laughed, oblivious to the man outside slowly stepping onto the marble forecourt. He was dressed simply. No flashy watch, no entourage, just a charcoal wool blazer, crisp slacks, and calm authority in every step. As he reached the entrance, a young employee, barely 22, rushed forward, eyes wide. "Hey, can you park that Rolls?" he barked, tossing a key fob toward him. It skidded across the pavement. The man didn't move. He stared at the keys for a long second, then up at the boy who had mistaken him for the valet. Inside, another employee cracked a joke. "Must be the new hire." What they didn't know, what no one in that showroom knew, was that the man they just humiliated was Miles Warren, founder of a global tech firm valued at $8.7 billion and the dealership's newest silent investor. He hadn't come to buy a car. He'd come to buy them out. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Miles Warren didn't pick up the keys. He didn't need to. They lay on the ground like a statement, a reflection of everything this place assumed about him. The young man who'd thrown them stood there awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot, waiting for the man he thought was a valet to comply. "Hello," the employee snapped, irritation creeping into his voice. "I said take the Rolls around back." Behind him, a few other sales associates chuckled from behind the smoked glass. One of them tapped his wrist like a watch, miming a time crunch. Another leaned in and whispered something, likely a joke about punctuality. Miles finally looked the boy in the eye. His expression didn't flinch. He wasn't angry. He was observant, deeply observant, and silent. The employee scoffed. "Whatever, man." He grabbed the fob himself, muttering something under his breath and striding off in search of a real valet. Miles walked into the showroom. Immediately, the mood shifted. Salesmen turned to assess him. Their smiles were polite but rehearsed, eyes flicking toward his shoes, his collar, the absence of a visible Rolex. He wasn't dressed like the usual buyers they courted. No diamond cufflinks, no designer logos announcing his arrival. And for that reason, he was deemed invisible. "Can I help you?" one of them said, not standing, not offering a name, just barely polite. Miles said nothing. He let the space speak first. It always did. The showroom was a temple to opulence. Italian tile, minimalist sculptures, accent lighting so soft it felt like dusk. Every design choice whispered exclusivity, but beneath the surface there was a stink, not of oil or leather, but of certainty, the kind that came from assuming you knew who mattered. "Are you here for service?" another asked, gesturing toward a distant hallway. A third leaned forward from his desk, smiling tightly. "Our valets operate outside, sir. This entrance is for guests." That one hurt more than the keys. Miles looked up at the chandelier above them, custom-blown glass, probably ordered from a Berlin studio. He'd seen it before. In fact, he owned the patent on the LED array inside it. But again, he said nothing. He strolled slowly past the Bugatti display, his eyes sweeping the details. Not the cars, the people, who they greeted, who they ignored, how they adjusted their tone for certain suits, how they called certain guests sir and others boss. It was a rhythm he knew too well. Because 20 years ago, Miles had stood in a showroom like this, broke, unshaven, curious, and had been told almost word for word, "This place isn't for people like you." And he had remembered it. He always remembered it. One of the managers, a man named Bryce Kinlan, finally rose from his desk. He was tall, late 40s, tan, polished, and immediately suspicious. "Excuse me, do you have an appointment with someone?" Bryce asked, tone curt but not yet rude. Miles smiled slightly. "I'm just browsing," he said. "Well, sir, this is a high-volume morning. We're hosting an event for exclusive clients only. You may want to come back." "I was invited." Bryce's brows knit. "By whom?" Miles didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward a glass-encased room at the far end of the showroom. The VIP suite, as they called it. A large mahogany door blocked the view, etched with the words, Private consultations by appointment only. Bryce stepped forward sharply. Sir, you can't go in there. But Miles already had. Inside, a young woman in a navy pantsuit looked up from her laptop, startled. May I help you? Miles reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim black folder. He placed it gently on the table. She opened it. Her eyes widened. 2 seconds later, her headset buzzed. It was the dealership's regional vice president. Miles Warren just walked in, the voice said. Let him see everything. Full transparency. No one speaks to him unless spoken to. And tell Bryce he's not to approach Mr. Warren again. The woman looked up at Miles with a newfound reverence. Mr. Warren, she said softly, standing, I apologize for the confusion. We weren't informed you'd be arriving in person. Miles sat down. He didn't nod. He didn't reassure. He simply said, I'm here to observe, and I want access to every department. Outside the glass room, Bryce stood frozen. The color drained from his face as he watched staff scramble. The man they had dismissed, ignored, and quietly mocked, now sat behind closed doors, being briefed like a visiting dignitary. Miles didn't want an apology. He wanted answers. Bryce Kinlan stood paralyzed outside the frosted glass of the VIP suite, every fiber of his curated professionalism unraveling. Just moments ago, he dismissed Miles Warren as a lost delivery driver or an over-eager car enthusiast. Now he watched employees dart in and out of the room, heads bowed, posture sharpened, tones reverent. He turned to the receptionist. Who is he? He asked, voice low. She looked up from her headset, pale. That's Miles Warren. The tech guy? She nodded. The tech guy, founder of AlterX Systems. They say he's worth over $8 billion. Bryce's stomach dropped. Inside the suite, Miles sat with the quiet composure of a man used to being underestimated. A large LED monitor projected a floor plan of the dealership, department breakdowns, ownership shares, operational reports. He wasn't here for a joyride, he was conducting a due diligence review. The truth was, Miles had already been in talks with the dealership's parent company for months. Valencia Auto Gallery was one of many assets under a larger investment umbrella. Voltaire Holdings, a publicly traded firm whose founder had quietly reached out to Miles 6 months ago. Why? Because the company was in trouble. Sales were stagnant, lawsuits loomed, and the entire luxury division was suffering under bloated overhead and a toxic, exclusionary culture that was beginning to make headlines in internal HR leaks. They needed a bailout. They needed reinvention. They needed Miles Warren. And he had agreed on one condition: complete access to the dealerships before acquisition. No red carpet, no pretense. No one was to know who he was. He wanted to see the company as it truly operated, from the inside out. And today had been his test. He had expected microaggressions. He had anticipated coded language, passive hostility. But what he hadn't expected, what struck him deeper, was just how proud the staff seemed to be in their bias. They didn't hide it. They wore it like a badge. He scrolled through one of the reports on the screen. Employee demographic breakdowns. In a staff of 83 across 3 locations, only 4 identified as Black or Latino. None of them held sales or management roles. Training logs, minimal. Customer satisfaction feedback from diverse clientele, ignored. He clicked on another document, a 2022 email from Bryce Kinlan himself, referring to a Black customer as probably here to take selfies, not buy anything. The email had been flagged, but no disciplinary action was taken. Miles leaned back in his chair. The rot wasn't just in customer service, it was systemic. His phone buzzed. Marcus, his longtime legal and financial advisor, was calling. Miles answered on speaker. You've seen enough? Marcus asked. I've seen too much, Miles replied. You want me to greenlight the final buyout docs? Not yet. I want full employee files, including internal complaints. And I want eyes on Bryce Kinlan's contract. We'll need legal grounds for immediate termination. Got it. Board meets tomorrow at 10. Make sure the press has the final statement by noon. Yes, sir. Miles ended the call and looked around the room. This dealership had been built on image, polish, pretense, status games. But image was fragile. One real story, one viral moment, and the empire could crumble. He remembered his mother's voice from years ago. Let them underestimate you, Miles. That's when you're most dangerous, he smiled. Outside, a manager was scrambling to gather the department heads. Inside, Miles was already drafting a new structure in his mind. Inclusive hiring protocols, cultural competency training, anonymous customer feedback systems, profit-sharing programs tied to ethical conduct metrics. He wasn't here to run a dealership. He was here to rebuild an ecosystem. A soft knock on the glass door. A young black woman entered, one of the 4 non-white employees in the entire company. She looked nervous. "Mr. Warren," she said quietly, "can I, can I speak with you?" Miles gestured to the chair across from him. "Of course." She sat fidgeting. "I just wanted to say, I knew who you were the second you walked in. I've followed your story for years, but I didn't say anything because—" She hesitated. "Because I wanted to see how they would treat you without knowing." Miles nodded slowly. "And?" "They failed," she whispered. "They failed every test." He leaned forward, voice gentle. "What's your name?" "Trina." "Trina, when this transition is complete, I want you to stay. And I want you to lead recruitment and culture development. Build the team this place should have had all along." Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," he said. "Because you saw it, and you stayed. That means something." Outside, Bryce paced nervously. He had no idea his future was being decided on the other side of that door. The next morning, the boardroom at Voltaire Holdings buzzed with false confidence. The directors, mostly older white men in tailored suits, sipped their espressos and skimmed printed copies of the Warren acquisition proposal. It was meant to be a formality, a ceremonial nod before handing over controlling interest to one of the world's most influential tech entrepreneurs. But the mood changed the moment Miles Warren entered the room. He didn't greet them with backslaps or smiles. He didn't shake hands. He placed a thick black folder in the center of the conference table. "This," he said, voice low but unmistakably commanding, "is a complete audit of Valencia Auto Gallery's internal culture, staffing history, customer treatment practices, and ethical violations. Compiled over 6 months, verified independently." The board chair, a man named Alan Drexler, forced a smile. "Miles, we're confident in your ability to transform the brand. But there's no need to dig through old mud. We're here to move forward." Miles didn't sit. "I'm not here to move forward without exposing what's been walked over." He opened the folder and slid several documents across the table. A transcript from a former employee, fired after reporting racist remarks by a sales director. HR logs showing a consistent pattern of denying promotions to non-white applicants with better performance metrics. Emails like Bryce Kinlan's, normalizing coded language and discriminatory assumptions. He flipped to another page. "Do you know how many black customers have completed a purchase over the last 18 months at your top-performing location?" No one answered. "3," he said. "3 out of over 1,000 sales." A thick silence settled. "And of those 3, all received lower trade-in appraisals and were offered above-market financing rates." Another director shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't about race. It's business." "No," Miles said sharply. "It's about race. Because race is embedded in the business model you pretended was neutral." He walked slowly to the window, looking out over the city skyline. "Valencia doesn't have a marketing problem. It has a rot problem. Systemic, unexamined, profitable." He turned back to the table. "And that ends now." Over the next hour, Miles outlined a full plan not just for ownership transfer, but for cultural exorcism. Immediate termination of Bryce Kinlan and 2 senior sales managers implicated in documented misconduct. Public acknowledgement of past practices and a formal apology campaign. Institution of a third-party equity audit every quarter with public results. A revised commission model tied not just to sales, but customer satisfaction across demographic lines. A full rebrand under new leadership, with a mission centered on access, respect, and reinvention. Some directors resisted, quietly of course. "It might spook our legacy clients," one muttered. Miles stared at him. "If your legacy clients can't handle fairness, They can follow your legacy board members out the door. The final vote was unanimous. They had no choice. Miles had the capital, the leverage, and now, thanks to public momentum, the moral high ground. He wasn't just acquiring Valencia, he was deconstructing it. Back at the dealership, Bryce Kinlan was called into his office by HR. He arrived confident, shoulders squared. He left 30 minutes later, ashen, silent, carrying a box. Some staff clapped as he exited. Others just watched. Trina, now officially Director of Culture and Talent, stood in the center of the showroom floor, clipboard in hand, reassigning schedules and reworking job descriptions. For the first time in her career, she had authority and backing, and she used it. She'd already begun rewriting training materials from scratch, starting with one central principle. Respect is not earned by your bank account. It is owed by your humanity. Every employee would be retrained, every sales process reevaluated, every barrier that once silently filtered out certain customers, language, assumptions, vibe checks, would be stripped away. Trina noticed how differently people moved now. Staff who once laughed behind customers' backs were quiet. Others who had endured in silence stepped forward with ideas. Fear had begun to lose its grip. Across the region, whispers turned into news. The story had leaked. Tech CEO buys dealership that mistook him for valet. New owner fires manager after racial profiling allegations. From dismissed to in charge, how Miles Warren exposed a broken sales empire. Online, the comments flooded in. Some were supportive, others hostile. But no one could deny what had happened. A man walked in, was misjudged, said nothing, and then rewrote the rules. Back in his new office, formerly Bryce's, Miles sat with his legal team reviewing final asset transfers. The room was stripped of all personal items, just steel, glass, and clean air. One of the lawyers asked, "Are you planning a press conference?" "No," Miles replied. "The work will speak for itself." He wasn't interested in optics. He was interested in obliteration of the systems that had thrived in silence. The next day, the building sign came down. A new name would rise, but not yet. First, the poison had to be drained. For 6 years, Rico Sullivan had worked in the back bay of Valencia Auto Gallery. A certified diagnostic technician with top-tier training, he had never once been allowed to come up front to meet customers, not even to explain a service issue directly. "Not our image," a manager had once said. He was used to it, that bitter phrase. He kept his head down, hit his metrics, and took pride in his work. But it always burned when he saw newer, less skilled techs, ones who looked the part, getting promoted. The day Miles Warren walked into the dealership, Rico had seen everything from the edge of the garage. The keys tossed at him, the dismissive tone, the way Bryce laughed it off like it was natural, and the way the man didn't flinch. Rico had leaned against the bay door, arms folded, not quite knowing why he couldn't look away. Now, less than a week later, he stood in a mandatory staff assembly. New leadership, new terms. Trina stood confidently at the front, detailing upcoming equity audits, reporting channels, anonymous feedback lines. Then came the moment. "We're not just rebuilding from the top down," she said. "We're listening from the ground up. If you've witnessed bias, exclusion, or anything else that compromised our standards, come forward. You will not be punished. You will be protected." She looked straight at Rico, not accusingly, knowingly. That night, Rico stayed late. Everyone else cleared out. The showroom lights dimmed. The silence stretched. Then he walked into the HR office and asked for a private meeting. He laid it all out. The coded language, the systemized underappraisals for black buyers, the informal profiling notes managers kept for walk-in guests, notes that used vague labels like sketchy, flashy, or not likely, that somehow always aligned with race or accent. He even handed over copies he'd quietly saved over the years. He told them about Bryce's backroom remarks, the jokes that came after customers left, the unofficial dress code for staff, one that kept anyone with braids, tattoos, or non-standard English out of the front end. When he finished, the HR rep, new, young, and clearly shaken, asked softly, "Why now?" Rico stared at her. "Because someone finally didn't stay quiet when it happened to them. And because that man didn't yell." He didn't curse. He just took the whole place. She didn't respond with corporate speak. She just nodded. The next morning, Rico was called into the conference room. Miles Warren was there. "You spoke," Miles said simply. "Thank you." Rico looked around. "I didn't do it for applause." "I know, but you're going to help lead the reform of the service division. You've earned that seat." Rico blinked. "Lead?" Miles nodded. "People like you kept this place running while others pretended to build it. That changes now." It wasn't just Rico. Across the company, other witnesses began to step forward. A receptionist revealed she had been warned not to speak too casually to elite clients, code for suppressing her natural accent. A Latina sales trainee shared how her client was reassigned mid-deal after management decided she was too green for a VIP customer. An IT contractor disclosed emails where leadership joked about diversity optics in boardroom photos. Each story was collected, documented, addressed, and none were ignored. Trina implemented a new initiative, the Mirror Room, a weekly closed-door forum where employees could share grievances, stories, and ideas directly with decision-makers. Nothing recorded, nothing retaliated, just truth. The first session was standing room only. A black janitor named Ms. Carla stood up and told everyone how, for 3 years, she had been cleaning the executive office bathrooms, but had never once been looked in the eye. She was promoted the following week to head of facilities, and now oversaw vendor contracts with an eye for fairness and respect. And as the witness awakening continued, customers noticed too. A man named David Lee, a Chinese-American entrepreneur, posted a now viral video describing his experience buying a car under the new regime. "I walked in expecting tension. Instead, someone offered me tea, asked what I valued beyond horsepower, and never once made me prove I was serious. This is how luxury should feel." It received 2.5 million views. The dealership's review ratings, once spotty and defensive, began to surge. Not because people were impressed by the cars, they always had been, but now they felt seen, heard, respected. The witnesses had woken up, and now they were rebuilding the story, one testimony, one truth at a time. By the second month of the transformation, the walls that once concealed Valencia's toxic culture were now transparent and trembling. But it wasn't just an internal shift anymore. The storm was gathering outside. News of Miles Warren's acquisition and reform had already become national conversation. Industry publications began investigating similar high-end dealerships across the country. Customers who had long accepted discriminatory treatment as part of the luxury experience were beginning to question the system they had participated in. But Miles didn't flinch. He leaned in. From his new operations center, no longer labeled executive, he led daily review meetings not with department heads alone, but with rotating staff from every level. Valets, receptionists, detailers, former interns. Everyone had a voice, and one by one the voices became loud. Miles and Trina launched a new project, Operation Reset. It was a 90-day initiative with a single goal: tear down every process Valencia used to evaluate, engage, and serve customers, and rebuild it from the ground up. At the first strategy session, Miles asked a simple question: what is luxury really, and who gets to define it? The room was silent. Then Rico raised his hand. "It's not the car, it's not the showroom. It's how a person feels when they walk in. Do they feel like they deserve to be here, or like they're being tolerated?" Miles smiled. "Exactly." They began with language. Scripts for phone calls, test drive requests, and financing consultations were rewritten to strip out all coded deference. Preferred client was gone. Vetted buyer was gone. The new language centered on service, not status. Next came behavior protocols. Staff were retrained to greet all customers the same way, with full attention, not filtered by appearance. Every incoming client was logged not by race or car type, but by intent and feedback. Trina introduced a blind match pilot system where sales reps were assigned customers at random rather than by assumption or intuition. The results were immediate. Cross-racial satisfaction scores rose by 38% in 2 weeks. The old staff handbooks were shredded. In their place, a new code was issued, the Four Commitments of Dignity. See every person as whole. Listen before you interpret. Deliver excellence without prejudice. Own your mistakes and correct them fast. But the more they rebuilt, the more the outside storm intensified. An expose dropped in the Atlantic, revealing a network of luxury dealerships across 5 states with similar discriminatory practices. Anonymous sources confirmed that many trained managers were taught to subtly filter customers based on race, accent, or perceived net worth. And in every article, Valencia was referenced as the company that got caught and corrected. Some accused Miles of using the scandal for publicity, but those inside the building knew better. He wasn't chasing headlines, he was chasing accountability. To amplify their reach, the Clarity Fund, yes, that Clarity Fund, announced a new partnership with Miles, a nationwide initiative called Drive Equal, a certification program that would audit luxury dealerships for equity, inclusion, and customer fairness. Only one dealership qualified in the first round, Valencia. By now, staff morale had shifted entirely. People no longer whispered. They engaged. They volunteered for committees, rewrote SOPs, and recommended friends and former colleagues to apply. Recruitment changed too. Miles insisted on removing name bias from applications. Resumes were reviewed anonymously first, skills, experience, values, then identities. The first round of hires under this system resulted in the most diverse team in Valencia's history. Black, Asian, Latino, LGBTQ+, and disabled candidates were all represented in visible, customer-facing roles. Still, there were consequences. Not everyone welcomed the storm. A few legacy customers voiced complaints. One even posted on social media, "Used to love coming to Valencia. Now it feels like a social experiment. Just sell me the car." The comment went viral. Miles responded directly. One sentence posted without flair. "If fairness feels unfamiliar, it's because you've mistaken privilege for normal." He didn't clap back again. He didn't need to. The public clapped for him. Customer applications skyrocketed, not because the cars had changed, but because the dealership had become a symbol of possibility, of progress, of proof. As the storm roared louder, Valencia no longer stood bracing against it. It stood welcoming it. It came during the 3rd week of Operation Reset, not from outside critics or resistant customers, but from the corporate summit of Voltaire Holdings itself. An emergency board meeting was scheduled. Miles Warren was summoned to headquarters. They said it was about brand risk mitigation. What they meant was he was shaking too many trees, and powerful people were starting to feel exposed. Inside the chrome and glass conference room, 12 executives sat in silence as Miles entered. The chair of the board, Alan Drexler, didn't stand to greet him. "Miles," Alan said, forcing a smile, "thank you for coming. We've been receiving mixed feedback." Miles sat down without waiting for an invitation. "You're referring to the complaints from clients who feel entitled to discrimination?" he asked calmly. Alan shifted in his seat. "We're referring to the shift in perception. Valencia was always marketed as elite, curated, exceptional. Your changes, though admirable, risk making the brand feel political." Miles leaned forward. "You think treating people with dignity is a political position?" Another board member cut in. "You've been quoted in national press. You're being positioned as the face of cultural reform. That's not what we signed up for." "You signed up for survival," Miles replied. "Your brand was dying under a toxic model. You came to me with your hand out." "We expected modernization," Alan shot back. "Not revolution." Miles stood. He pulled a remote from his pocket and clicked. The screen behind them lit up. A slideshow of hard data revenue growth, plus 17% since the reforms began. Customer return rate, up 43%. Staff retention, highest in 8 years. Public sentiment index, 94% positive. Pre-orders for the upcoming EV line, tripled projections. The boardroom fell quiet. Miles let the silence linger. "You asked for results," he said. "Here they are. Not PR spin, not aspirational nonsense, measurable change." He turned to Alan. "You're not upset because the model's failing. You're upset because it succeeded without your comfort. Alan's jaw tightened. Miles pressed on. You wanted innovation, as long as it kept old power structures intact. You wanted progress, as long as it didn't feel like loss. But equity always feels like loss when you've been hoarding advantage. Another director, one of the few women on the board, spoke up softly. I visited the flagship store, spoke to staff, spoke to customers. What's happening there is rare, and it's working. I support the expansion. Several heads turned in surprise. Miles didn't flinch. I'm not asking for permission, he said, but I'm offering a choice. He placed two folders on the table. In the first, a proposal to scale Valencia's new model to all dealerships under Voltaire Holdings. Inclusive leadership training, equity audits, anonymous customer reviews. The data suggests it'll boost revenue 22% over 2 years. He tapped the second folder. In this one, my formal notice to resign and trigger my buyout clause. I'll take my name, my capital, and my credibility and build a competing brand from scratch. Alan laughed nervously. You wouldn't. I've done it before. I'll do it again. They knew he wasn't bluffing, because in tech, in media, in philanthropy, Miles Warren didn't threaten. He moved. Fast, strategic, unapologetic. The board conferred in whispers for 10 long minutes. Then the vote was taken. 9 in favor, 3 abstentions, 0 opposed. The Valencia model would expand, company-wide. Miles didn't celebrate. He simply nodded and left the room. Later that evening, back at the dealership, the team waited anxiously. The mirror room was full. Maria, Rico, Trina, and a dozen others had stayed late, knowing the confrontation was happening. When Miles returned, he walked in without a word and placed the signboard resolution on the table. Permanent, he said, and scalable. Trina beamed. They agreed? They didn't have a choice, he replied. Applause broke out, not loud but fierce. Not for Miles, for what they'd built together, for proof that truth, persistence, and structure could actually win. Outside it began to rain, heavy and sudden, but no one ran for cover. They stood in the storm, heads lifted, finally knowing they had created something stronger than just a policy shift or a one-time correction. They had confronted a system that told them luxury meant exclusion, and they had redefined it. The day the first legacy dealership fell was quiet. No press conference, no grand announcement. Just a memo leaked online. Valencia Westwood location closed indefinitely due to internal investigations and restructuring. It went viral in minutes. That location, one of the most prestigious under Voltaire Holdings, had refused to implement the Warren protocols. Despite board approval and the success of the pilot stores, Westwood's leadership, led by a regional director named Carl Renshaw, had resisted at every turn. Doesn't fit our clientele, Renshaw had said. Translation, our wealthy white customers might feel uncomfortable. The new policies, transparent pricing, identity-blind service assignment, rotating ethics panels, were labeled disruptive. Employees who supported the changes were quietly reassigned or frozen out. One, a black showroom consultant named Andre, was terminated under the vague claim of cultural misalignment. But Andre had receipts. He sent them directly to Trina, and Trina sent them to Miles. That's when the collapse began. Within 24 hours, Miles flew to LA, unannounced, and walked straight into the Westwood showroom. His arrival caught Renshaw off guard. The man blustered, tried to frame the resistance as regional nuance, but Miles didn't let him finish. Save it, Miles said. I've already seen the staff complaints, the customer reports, the financial manipulations. Renshaw smirked. You can't just walk in here and shut us down. Miles leaned in. Actually, I can, and I am. By noon, security escorted Renshaw out. By 3 p.m., the store's access systems were reset. A third-party equity audit team arrived the next day. What they found stunned even the most cynical investigators. Sales staff trained to subtly underprice trade-ins from Black and Latino clients. Valencia tier system that classified customers into coded groups based on race and perceived affluence. Bonuses linked to profile efficiency, which essentially rewarded profiling. Directives to prioritize showroom tours for customers who visually reinforced the brand. The report leaked within 72 hours, and the backlash was nuclear. Customer petitions, public boycotts. Former employees came forward with stories of harassment, manipulation, even threats. One woman, a Korean-American finance associate, recounted being told to change her name on paperwork because clients won't trust a Hyunju. Media outlets swarmed. The headlines were brutal. Luxury with a lie, what really happened inside Valencia Westwood. He bought the company, then discovered the poison inside. Miles Warren's revolution hits resistance and destroys it. Voltaire Holdings issued a public apology, but it was too late for containment. The collapse had already gone viral. Within a week, 2 more locations self-reported. Another shut its doors to conduct internal culture investigations. And every dealership under the Voltaire umbrella scrambled to realign with the new protocols or risk the same fate. Inside the Clarity Fund's digital office, the data team tracks social metrics, brand favorability for Valencia's restructured stores, plus 62%. Employee satisfaction scores, highest ever recorded. Applications from minority-owned suppliers, tripled. Consumer trust index, rebounding in real time. But none of that was what mattered most to Miles. What mattered was what he saw on the ground. In Houston, a single mom named Camille, recently hired as a front desk associate, was now overseeing training modules for new hires. She had no Ivy League degree, but her feedback system was praised by HR analysts as a model for sustainable equity. In Chicago, a retired Navy vet named Desmond led a new integrity review board, ensuring every complaint was addressed with speed and care. In Miami, a transgender mechanic named Jules, once denied a job at 5 other shops, was now a rising team lead, mentoring interns and rewriting policies with lived experience at the center. This wasn't about Miles anymore. It was about the system cracking and what was growing through the fractures. Even the automotive world began to shift. Competitor brands, once smug in their distance, began reaching out to Clarity for consulting. Not because they had seen the light, but because they had seen the storm. And they knew, adapt or get swept away. At the Grand Summit where the original insult had occurred, a new annual conference was being planned. Not a gala, a gathering. No velvet ropes, no VIP tiers, just builders. People who knew what it was like to be misjudged, silenced, and underestimated, and who chose to turn those moments into mandates. As for Renshaw, he disappeared from the industry. No lawsuit, no statement, just silence. But his name would be remembered, not as a villain, but as a symbol, a warning, that when you build your legacy on exclusion, the collapse is just one reckoning away, and the reckoning always arrives, sometimes dressed in a simple blazer, refusing to pick up a set of tossed keys. The Valencia Auto Gallery no longer existed, at least not in the way it once did. The name remained, but everything else had been stripped, examined, and rebuilt. What had once been a polished facade covering years of elitism and systemic rot was now the proving ground for a new kind of power, earned, shared, and accountable. The flagship location in San Francisco had undergone a total transformation. The lobby, once filled with silent luxury and staff trained to smile only at status, now hosted a community space called the Drive Forward Atrium, a collaborative zone where customers, staff, and even students could engage with emerging mobility technology, inclusive design, and financial literacy resources. Trina, now chief culture architect, designed it herself. It had to be more than a car showroom, she said. It had to be a place that changed people's expectations of what service, luxury, and dignity look like, together. The showroom walls displayed not only cars, but stories. Each featured employee had their journey told in bold black text next to their portrait. Not just their job title, but their struggle, their breakthrough, their contribution. Rico's story was there, from ignored to empowered, how a technician helped rewrite the rules. So was Ms. Carla's, the janitor who brought us to our knees, then helped us stand taller. But it wasn't just storytelling. The systems had changed. Every salesperson was now trained in ethical communication. Customer engagement metrics now included respect, fairness, and transparency, not just conversion rates. Each employee had a mentorship pathway that included community reinvestment. And perhaps most revolutionary of all, base compensation had increased while commission dependency decreased. Why? Because Miles believed people did their best work when they weren't desperate to survive. And it worked. Customers noticed. So did competitors. So did regulators. Several consumer advocacy groups declared Valencia's transformation a model for ethical reinvention. Financial journals, once skeptical, published articles titled Warren's Wheel: How Purpose Outpaced Prestige, the humble takeover that changed a billion-dollar industry. But for Miles, the most powerful signs of rebirth came in the quiet moments. Like when a Muslim family walked in, a father in traditional dress, his wife wearing a hijab, and were greeted like VIPs. No glances, no hesitation, just honest welcome. Or when a young woman with autism tests drove a vehicle and was assigned a rep who had undergone inclusive communication training, part of a program Trina had introduced just weeks earlier. Or when Miles received a handwritten letter from a boy in Atlanta. Mr. Warren, my dad said you bought the car place where they treated you bad. He said you didn't yell or fight. You just made them better. When I grow up, I want to make things better too. Miles kept that letter in his wallet, not because it flattered him, but because it reminded him that legacy wasn't in what you owned. It was in what you changed. Across the country, Drive Equal, the Clarity Fund's dealership equity certification initiative, had expanded to 19 states. Miles had committed to offering pro bono consulting to any automotive business willing to undergo the full audit and reform process. Most were afraid, but some were brave. One such dealership, formerly known for its exclusivity in Manhattan, underwent the full transition and saw record growth. Turns out, their new GM said, respect is good for business. Meanwhile, Miles stepped back from daily operations. He handed the CEO role to a new leader, Mariana Cruz, a first-generation Mexican-American business strategist who had helped engineer ethical labor reforms in South America. Her first internal message to the team read, "We are not a dealership. We are a declaration that luxury must never mean exclusion again." At the rededication ceremony of the San Francisco flagship store, no celebrities were invited. Instead, they invited former customers who had once been profiled, ignored, or dismissed. Each one was welcomed with a round of applause and invited to speak. One elderly black man took the mic and simply said, "This is the first time in 50 years someone looked me in the eye and asked what I wanted in a car, not what I could afford." And that was the moment Miles realized. The rebirth wasn't just in systems or architecture, it was in memory. Because when you rebuild from the ashes of injustice, what you're truly creating isn't a company. It's a cultural memory that reminds people, you were seen, you were heard, you deserved better. And now it's here. It began with a mistake. A man walked into a dealership. He was misjudged, dismissed, told without words that he didn't belong. He didn't shout. He didn't correct them. He bought the company. But what Miles Warren did next was far more radical than acquisition. He did not gloat, retaliate, or turn the tables for his own satisfaction. Instead, he built something few with power ever dared to, a system designed to outlast him, without needing him. 1 year after that fateful day at Valencia, the dealership chain was no longer a chain in the traditional sense. It had evolved into a network of ethical mobility centers. No two locations were exactly the same. They reflected their communities, their people, their pain, and their progress. The Drive Forward annual review published by the Clarity Fund revealed stunning figures. Customer satisfaction across all demographics, 96%. Revenue growth, plus 31% year over year. Internal promotions from underrepresented backgrounds, up 400%. Customer service bias complaints, down 87%. Independent equity audit rating, transformational compliance. But the numbers weren't the legacy. The legacy was in the invisible moments, the kind that don't make spreadsheets. Like the employee in Dallas who stopped a profiling incident before it began because of the empathy first training, or the woman in Detroit who, for the first time, saw her son with Down syndrome tests drive a car without being talked down to. Or the teenage intern in Oakland who said in a feedback session, "I used to think places like this weren't for people like me. Now I think places like this need people like me." The ripple effects stretch far beyond showrooms. Banks started reevaluating their dealership lending partners. Investor groups began adding ethical culture benchmarks to their evaluations. Universities used Valencia's transformation as a case study in sustainable business reform. And slowly, other sectors began to ask the same question. What if dignity was built into design, not patched on in panic? But perhaps the most telling moment of all came on a quiet morning when Miles walked anonymously into a small Valencia branch in Albuquerque. He wore a hoodie, no security, no press. He asked a young rep, no older than 22, what made their store different. The rep didn't recognize him, but he answered without hesitation. "We don't serve customers to impress them. We serve them to honor them." Miles nodded. That was it. The legacy wasn't in his name or his money. It was in a young employee speaking truth, with no audience, no reward, just conviction. As Miles left the dealership, he passed by a wall where a quote was etched into steel beside the company values. "True power is not the ability to enter any room. It's the courage to change what that room means for everyone else." Miles Warren. He had never asked them to engrave that, but someone had. A staff member, a manager, a believer. It made him pause. Then he stepped outside into the sun, into a world slightly more just than it had been the year before. He had never wanted to be famous. He wanted to be effective. And now, as more people were being hired, served, seen, and celebrated, not in spite of who they were, but because of who they were, he finally understood what that small humiliation had truly given him. It had handed him clarity. It had sharpened the edges of what he already believed. That quiet endurance wasn't weakness, that justice didn't need theatrics, and that when systems fail loudly, transformation must answer quietly, relentlessly, and with precision. He had not just bought the company, he had rewritten its soul. And in doing so, he had taught an entire industry a lesson they couldn't unlearn. That equity is not a trend, it is a standard. And it starts the moment someone chooses not to prove their worth, but to build spaces where worth is no longer questioned. That is the moral legacy of Miles Warren. That is the story. And it all started with a tossed set of keys. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.